All right, welcome everybody. More and more people are joining, which is great. I would like to welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat. So please let us know who you are, where you're from. I saw on the list of participants that we have people from various countries, quite some people from Asia, of course, since today's webinar will focus on our efforts to end FGM in Asia, but we also have people from Kenya, Tanzania, New York, many countries in Europe. So very nice to see that we have such a diverse group of people. I think I wait 2 more minutes and then we will officially start. I would like to ask everybody to unmute yourself in case you want to say something. You can also raise, press the raise your hand button if you want to say something. We first will have various presentations and we do the Q&A session afterwards. But for those who also were present during the first 2 webinars, I really like to make it as interactive as possible. So please feel free to already, in case you have any questions during the presentations, to post them in the chat box. Also feel free to raise your hand in case you want to interrupt. We see whether there is an opportunity to ask your question straight away. And I see that more and more people are joining. I let them in from the waiting room. All right, let's start. First of all, I would like to share with you that I'm very, very excited about this 3rd webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on our efforts to end FGM. This webinar, we will focus on the situation in Asia. So the first webinar focused on Tanzania, the second one on the situation in Kenya, and today we will spend an hour or an hour and a half maximum on the situation in Asia. As many of you know, the situation in Asia is very often overlooked, but we have so much evidence that FGM is happening in that region. So that's why I also find it very, very important to also, when we talk about the pandemic, if we talk about COVID-19, to also look at what is happening on the ground in Asian countries. This is how the webinar will look like today. So I will shortly say something about the preliminary research that I'm conducting on the impact of COVID-19 on our efforts to end FGM. I shortly will touch upon Ebola and COVID-19 as well. And I will make a comparison between the African continent and the Asian countries, because there are important differences. Then I will give the floor to Ebony of Orchid Project, who will share with you some insights on the impact of COVID-19 on organizations working on FGM, and she will also tell us and share with us the Asia network to end FGM. Then we will move to Ms. Retty Ratnawati, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, the National Commission on Violence Against Women in Indonesia, who will share with us some very interesting results of a research that has been conducted and also shares with us some insights on how COVID-19 is impacting her work in Indonesia. And then we will move to Aarefa Johari of Sahiyo in India, who will share with us the impact in India, but also shares with us the development of a very, very nice app called Mumkin. So this is the overall outline of today's webinar. Before I start, I would like to thank Orchid Project and also ARROW, who together took the initiative to set up a network, the Asian network to End FGM, because we organized this webinar today together. So thank you very much for being a friend, but also organizing this together and raising more awareness on COVID-19, but also on the importance of working together also in the Asian region. For those who just joined, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I would love to hear who you are, where you are from. Also, during the presentations, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will come back to them. This is the outline of my presentation. So for those who participated in the first two webinars, I invited actually all participants to share with me how COVID-19 is impacting your work. And then I ask you to focus on 4 questions. First of all, the potential risks, the opportunities, challenges, and solutions. So I will share with you some of those results. I will also reflect shortly on COVID-19 and Ebola as I'm writing a research paper on the comparison between the two practices. And then I will focus on the situation in Asia shortly before I give the floor to the real experts. Now the input from you. So this is a slide, let's work together, a slide of the previous webinars where I invited you to share with me your insights on how COVID-19 is impacting your work. And here you see the front page of an 8-pager that I wrote. So all the information I collected, all the data I received, I want to share it with everybody. So with all of you, since you took the time to write me, to email me, to send me messages on WhatsApp. I had many Zoom calls with many of you. And I'm very thankful that you took the time to share with me your insights. So via this link, you can access the 8-pager. In the 8-pager, I also shortly summarized the most important research findings that you can find here. So I have the risks, the opportunities, the challenges, and the solutions. I just wanted to quickly draw your attention to this. I will share the PowerPoint presentation, of course, with everybody. I will also share the link so you can take your time to read through this document when you have time. Now, a few remarks to start with. This is a slide that I also used the previous webinar. There is more and more evidence that an increased number of girls are at risk of FGM in Africa. So here you see a link to the UNFPA report that says that there is an estimated 2 million girls that would be cut over the next decades that otherwise, if the pandemic, if COVID-19 wouldn't happen, wouldn't have occurred. We don't have currently academic research yet. We don't have publications on the impact of COVID-19, and that's why we need to resort to newspaper articles, to stories that people share on Twitter, and also the preliminary research result of my own research. So this is a respondent from Nigeria who also says COVID-19 has increased the number of girls cut in many rural communities in Enugu State, Nigeria. And this is an article of The Guardian that was published last week. And in this article, we read that there is a huge FGM rise recorded in Somalia during coronavirus lockdown. And what is very heartbreaking is that, and here I have the quote, the economic downturn caused by coronavirus has also spurred cutters to toot for more business, she said. The cutters have been knocking on doors, including mine, asking if there are young girls they can cut. I was so shocked, said Ellen, who has two daughters aged 5 and 9. So these are, of course, very, very troubling situations. This is, of course, a clear indication that the estimations of UNFPA are correct and that there are many, many girls at risk of FGM at this very moment. However, I asked all participants of the webinar to send me their answers to the 4 questions. And also the webinars were recorded, they were put on YouTube. So also long after the webinars took place, I received responses. And this is from a respondent from India. And she said, medicalization of FGM came to a standstill. Hospitals are shut or semi-closed. Government hospitals became COVID-19 hospitals. Individual doctors who perform FGM are shut in the city. Only in rural areas it is continuing by a local midwife. And then I thought, this is very interesting because it seems that there is an increase of FGM during COVID-19 at the African continent, but it seems that there is a decrease of FGM cases in Asia. So this really sparked my interest and I wanted to know more. But before we dive into that, I also want to share with you some of my findings related to COVID-19 and Ebola. So this sparked my interest because of the explanatory note of UNICEF that was published. It was one of the first publications on harmful practices in COVID-19, where the comparison between Ebola and COVID-19 was made. During the very first webinar, I dove into this topic, so I won't do that again, but very shortly, what was the situation during Ebola? FGM was interrupted in West African countries. We saw that child marriage during Ebola increased, but then FGM decreased. So girls were married off, but they were not cut in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. However, after Ebola left the country, FGM resumed again. So unfortunately, as you see here also in a newspaper article, Ebola fears bring female genital mutilation to near halt in Sierra Leone. Unfortunately, this was only temporarily. Now with COVID-19, as we discussed during the first and the second webinar, we see an increase in FGM, and it seems that parents see an opportunity and take advantage of the pandemic, at least in the African context. Now, what I did the past 2 weeks is to also look more into the similarities and differences between COVID-19 and Ebola, and I quickly want to share with you some of my findings. I think the manifestation is very important. So the difference between Ebola and COVID-19, as you can see on the slide here, is that Ebola was symptomatic, the mortality rate was really high, and people were very scared. People were very scared of Ebola. While with COVID-19, you see that the symptoms are, that people are asymptomatic. So they very often do not have the symptoms. There's research that shows that about 70% of the people are asymptomatic. Now, the mortality rate is also relatively low, especially compared to Ebola. Then something I'm studying more in depth are demographic characteristics, because what we see in Europe is that especially elderly people, so people who are 70 plus, are in the risk category. Well, if you look at the demographics in Africa, we all know that the African population is relatively young. So that is also a very interesting factor. And that results in the fact like the asymptomatic cases and the low mortality rate at least results in the fact that at this stage, people are not very scared of COVID-19. And that might lead to an increased FGM. Now, very shortly, what happened during Ebola? First of all, people had the knowledge about the spread of the virus. Second of all, traditional leaders and also governments called for an end of the practice to prevent the virus to spread. And there was also in some countries a nationwide ban, although unfortunately this was only temporarily. Then I would like to move quickly to the situation in India. I had a very nice conversation with Masuma of We Speak Out, and she explained to me the following implications of COVID-19. First of all, in India, FGM is not criminalized, and NGOs were really working hard to try to get a bill in the country. So the process of drafting a bill, which is a process involving professors, students, activists, came due to COVID-19 to a standstill. There's also another legal implication because cases that are pending before court, including a very important case, including the right to freedom of religion and the prohibition of FGM, also came to a halt due to COVID-19. I've been informed that there are no more hearings at this stage and that the case is postponed. Now, there are also, apart from legal implications for NGOs. So as we saw in the African context as well, fieldwork is prohibited due to travel restrictions. So it is impossible for NGOs to go into the field. Community outreach and awareness is impossible due to COVID-19. And therefore, it's currently very challenging to reach victims. During our previous webinar, we already discussed very creative ways in which NGOs are now still trying to do their outreach and their community engagement activities, for example, through the radio, through television, but still also NGOs in India shared with me that communities are not very often familiar with modern technology or to meet, for example, like we do today via Zoom. And also they felt that FGM is sometimes too sensitive as a subject to meet online, and that it's really necessary to meet face to face. What I also find very interesting is the fact that I've been informed that in urban areas the practice has stopped. That also relates to the quote I shared with you before. So the clinics that are performing FGM seems to be closed. Only government hospitals are open, and they are mostly dealing at the moment with COVID-19 patients. What is also very interesting, and this is specifically the case for India, is that children under the age of 10 and persons above the age of 60 are prohibited from leaving the house. So they are not allowed on the streets. And the fact is that usually girls at the age of 7 are cut in India, and that the midwives are very often elderly women. So this could be another reason why FGM currently came to a halt. But I would love to hear also from our speakers whether they have the same information and whether they can confirm that. Cities are hit hard by COVID-19, so this is a more general remark. The urban population take the measures that the government proposes very seriously, and they are also very strictly enforced. In rural areas, it is a bit of a different story. So they are not as much affected by COVID-19 as the urban areas. And the measures are not that strictly enforced. So the experience from people on the ground, for example, in India, is that local midwives in rural areas continue to practice FGM. Now I come to my conclusion, because I have spoken already too much. My conclusion, stay home, stay safe. Last webinar, we concluded that this doesn't apply to girls at risk of FGM in Africa. And if we see the newspaper articles, for example, from The Guardian, where cutters go door to door in Somalia, this is absolutely the case. However, when we take a look at the situation in Asia, COVID-19 might, like in the situation of Ebola, provide a window of opportunity. And that is something I would like to explore today during our webinar. One other important difference between Asia and Africa is that at least in India, for example, I do not see a connection between FGM and child marriage. So what we see in Africa, as we discussed during our second webinar, was that parents have economic distress, they have to close their business, they have economic difficulties, and what they do is that they marry off their daughters. Now, in order for the daughters to get married, they need to undergo FGM first, and this is one of the reasons why we see an increase in FGM in the African context. Now, this connection between FGM and child marriage is something we don't really see in India, for example. So this is a very important issue to take into consideration. Then my two last conclusions are very similar as last webinar. There tend to be less attention for FGM during COVID-19, and also during the past 2-3 weeks when I did more research, you clearly see that there is a lot of attention for gender-based violence, domestic violence, but not so much for FGM. So I think we all have a responsibility here to make sure that FGM is at the center of all plans in response of COVID-19. And my last remark is that research is still very scarce on FGM and COVID-19, but I would like to ask you to let's work together and to share information, experience, and knowledge like we are doing today. And I would like to thank you very much for that, because I think this is the only way in which we can make the right choices in order to combat all the difficult situations as a result of COVID-19. All right. I would like to ask everybody to mute yourself, and then I would like to give the floor to Ebony.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I hope you can hear me. And thanks so much on behalf of the whole Asia Network for inviting us to be part of this webinar. It's been a brilliant series so far. And we're really pleased to be able to speak a bit about what we're hearing from our partners across Asia in relation to FGMC and COVID-19. So I'm just going to say a few words on behalf of both Orchid Project, where I'm Head of Advocacy and Policy, and also ARROW, who are our partner in terms of initiating the network. We basically, it's about a year ago now that we came together and thought, how can we do more to support the amazing work that's happening on the ground across various Asian countries, from activists who are sometimes working on their own on this issue, to community-based organisations, to larger NGOs, and also researchers and journalists and others who are trying to sort of shine a spotlight on this issue across Asia. And as you've mentioned before, it is a region that is not often spoken about in relation to this issue, and that's something we want to really try to address along with the various organisations that form part of the network. So just a little bit about Orchid Project. We're a global FGMC organisation. We work with partners currently in East Africa, West Africa, and obviously now Asia. And we have a lot of community-based social norms work that we do alongside strategic advocacy to hold governments to account for ending FGMC. And ARROW are, working actively across Asia Pacific on a range of sexual reproductive health rights issues, and we're really pleased to be working with them on this project. Just to emphasize, the network is not about us, it's about all of those organizations and activists that I've mentioned. And we've really tried hard over the last year to reach out and map work going on the ground, and also hear the expertise of those organisations and individuals, and what they think is needed to really shine more of a spotlight on FGMC in Asia. So that's what we've been trying to do, and you can see a slide in front of you now which shows the front page of the consultation that we did late last year, which summarises some of the findings in terms of what we heard and what we think is needed to really draw more attention to this issue and achieve SDG 5.3.2, which is ending the practice by 2030. Just quickly, before I talk about some of what we've heard from Asia Network members in relation to COVID-19, I just wanted to highlight some of the broad challenges that we face on working on this issue in Asia. I think, firstly, there's a huge data gap. UNICEF is the lead UN agency for data specifically on FGMC, and we know that they have collected household data, representative data rather, across 31 countries globally, but only 2 of those countries are currently in Asia. One is Indonesia, which is critical due to the high levels of prevalence in Indonesia, and the second is Maldives, and that the data from the Maldives has only just come into the global data set. So there are many more countries, as Anne-Marie said, that we know, where we know that FGMC is being practiced and we don't have data. And we really need to, as a global community, address the data gaps we have everywhere, and particularly in Asia. And I think in connection with that is an accountability gap. We don't have the data, so we're not seeing the action we need from governments to really tackle this issue. And that's another area that we want to focus on in terms of advocacy and policy work through the network. So as we mentioned before, we're seeing a lack of criminalization of FGMC across many Asian countries, despite international commitments that states may have made, or international human rights law, such as CEDAW or the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We're not seeing those international commitments translated into protection for women and girls. We're going to hear a bit more later from our colleagues at Komnas Perempuan and also Sahiyo, so I won't go into a huge amount more detail, but we need to speak about the fact that obviously FGMC is seen as a religious obligation in many Asian countries, which creates an additional challenge that we need to work through and work in partnership with others to tackle. And also medicalization is a key driver of the practice, and that embeds the practice and commercializes the practice to an extent, and we need to be able to have responses to deal with that. Interestingly, with COVID-19, we're seeing that that may be meaning that because health institutions or centres are closed, that the practice is being is going down currently, according to anecdotal evidence. And I'll go through now some of the anecdotal evidence that we've been hearing from members of the network, just quickly. So yeah, on this first slide, some of the large-scale ceremonies may be being postponed in some countries, such as Indonesia, and that's quite significant, as people obviously have to redirect resources to deal with basic needs. We've heard from partners in Malaysia, and this aligns with what we were hearing from India, that clinical work is being postponed, health services and clinics are closing or rediverting to deal with COVID-19, understandably. And then we're also hearing that this is a practice that's already shrouded in secrecy, and that's going to become even more the case now that we are responding as a global community to COVID-19. Next slide. FGMC is becoming deprioritized even further because of what's happening now, and the pandemic and the need to respond to it. We can't get into communities. Obviously, we know that that's the case in many other contexts. Programmatic work, face-to-face dialogue is so important in terms of tackling the underlying social norms that perpetuate FGMC, and we can't access communities now. Advocacy work is either being slowed down or pushed back because now's not the time. We can't talk about FGMC now, we need to speak about other things. But conversely, online engagement, and I know that you've spoken a bit about that in previous webinars, and also technology and social media are ways in which we can reach people in different ways, because everyone is very much at home. So how can we use that opportunity to carry on conversations around FGMC? So I'm going to stop there and just say, please reach out to myself and my colleagues at ARROW if you have any questions about the network and our work. And now I'd like to hand back to Anne-Marie so we can hear from the real experts from our colleagues at Komnas Perempuan and Indonesia, and also Sahiyo in India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ebony. That was fantastic. Very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I then now would like to move to Ms. Retty Ratnawati. She is from the National Commission on Violence Against Women in Indonesia, and I'm very honored that you're here with us today. Please, the floor is yours. Could you please unmute yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can, very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, for this nice introduction. I actually here as the commissioner for the Komnas Perempuan, or we call it the Indonesian National Commission on Violence Against Women. This is actually one of the national human rights institution. The history is established in a response to strong public demand, especially from women, excuse me, for the state that take responsible for the violence against women. This subsequent to sexual attacks, including the mass rape against Chinese women during May 1998 riots. And this national mechanism to protect the women's human rights established by the presidential decree in 1998. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this Komnas Perempuan is to build a conducive environment for the elimination of all forms of the violence against women, to increase the prevention efforts against all forms of the violence against women, protection and fulfillment of the women's rights in Indonesia. So we also have the mandate as to promote the public awareness, research and review relevant laws and regulations, monitor and report on violence against women, women's human rights, and provide input and recommendation to the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government. We also have the mandate to develop the regional and international. So this is all the situation that we are not directly conduct to this grassroots level. So anyhow, in 2017, our previous team in Komnas Perempuan, so because now I'm just the new commissioner from 2020 to 2024. So the work that's been done by the previous commissioners in some provinces in Indonesia, about 10 provinces. This is actually the background based on the 2013, the National Basic Health Survey found that 51.2% girls, it's 0 to 18 in Indonesia, have experienced FGMC. However, this is not included the information on the types of the FGMC being practiced or its. So therefore, the objective is to deepen our understanding of the FGMC practices in this highest prevalence in the 7th province and the other 3 that we also have high prevalence. Yeah. Anyhow, this is not reflects the whole of Indonesian situation. just to remind you. We actually work with the Gadjah Mada University in the Center for Population and Policy as the quantitative research, and the Komnas Perempuan actually a lot doing with these qualitative research. And the 10 provinces is Gorontalo, as Ibu just stated, Bangka Belitung, this is in Sumatra here, and then the Banten, close to Jakarta here, and Riau, and then South Kalimantan, and then West Java, and also West Sulawesi, and also the East Kalimantan up there, Jambi in Sumatra, and also West Nusa Tenggara. So this is the place that we have the data collected. So the study captured the perspective of the parents of girls who had experienced FGMC in the demand side, and the midwives as the health services provider, and also the traditional services provider. Next slide, please. Excuse me, next slide, please. Gini. Okay. Excuse me, would you pass the previous one, please?
I'm sorry, Ms. Retty. So we were at this slide, and this is the next one. Which one will you want to?
Yeah.
Is this okay, or did this one?
Yeah, this is okay. And then the next one. Thank you. Yeah, so actually the country, the policy that we have in Indonesia, we have several several law that is actually keep on changing, and in the box in the right hand side, for example, the history of the FGMC policies in Indonesia. In 2006, the Ministry of Health issued the circular letter to prohibit the FGMC being performed by the health services providers. And then 2008, the Indonesian Ulama Council decree a fatwa to not prohibit the FGMC. So the Indonesian Islamic Ulama considered that FGMC as a fitrah, or the Fitusin spirit, Syiar Islam, and makrumah, so a noble of deed. And then in 2010, the Ministry of Health issued the Ministerial Regulation number about the FGMC, that it does not authorize health service providers to perform FGMC, but stated that the FGMC implementation must be conducted in safe and hygienic manner. And then in 2014, we have also issued the decree number 6 to revoke the 2010 decree. However, the decree is still ambiguous. It provides at Article 2 that the Advisory Council of Health and Islamic Teaching must publish guidelines on FGMC to ensure the safety and the health of girls and prevent female genital mutilation. So this is the things that we don't know whether this is the wrong one or the right one. The next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Right. So this is the research findings here. we have some few of the parents actually that they have the concern that if they have to do the FGMC because of the religious order or the cultural tradition and a family tradition. The health impacts here actually this is contradictory with the medical evidence, of course, but they said that there is no infection and there is okay with the girls' cells, thing like that. And the health service providers, that is done in 2017, and then if they do this, the cost will be between 15,000 Indonesian rupiah. That means about 50,000 is $5 to 20 to $10 US. And however, in some traditional providers, they do not need any money to do that. In some also, this is a birth package, so they don't have to pay anything. FGM medicalization, and this is not good at all. Above all, that is the in the right hand side, you can see that is the type 1 for WHO is yeah, the total about 31.8%, and then also the type 4. But the others, cutting off the clitoris and etc., that is the rest of this. And the fifth, that this is important to engaging the religious leaders to encourage not to do the FGMC. However, we have to learn from the other countries that they succeed to decrease the FGMC, like in Middle East, for example. Thank you. Next slide, please.
You have, sorry to interrupt, but I would like to ask you to wrap up to also allow the other speaker to.
Yes, this is, I think I will wrap up the.
Okay, thank you.
So this is actually the conclusion. And so next slide, please. So this is, I think this is the most important part. About the COVID-19 now, because most of the FGMC is also done using the party, a kind of party. But now we are in the situation there is almost lockdown. Therefore, there is no not allowed to have a gathering more than 10 people. Therefore, these FGMC cannot be performed without any party. So therefore, this is likely that FGMC now is decreased because of that situation that we cannot have the gathering more than 10 people. So I think this is the that we can share with this topic. Thank you, Annie. Yeah.
Do you want to say something about this slide as well, or?
Yeah, this is so in Gorontalo, Alor, and Sumbawa. This is because we have to involve more than 10 people, and therefore we cannot do this FGMC ceremony during COVID-19 now. Thank you very much, Annie. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abu Retty. That was very, very interesting. I have one question, because the research that you have presented, is it also available in English? Can we perhaps share it with the participants of this webinar?
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. So we will do that with the PowerPoint presentations. Thank you so much. And again, to all participants, in case you have any questions, feel free to already write them out in the chat or post them afterwards. I then would like to move to our last speaker of today, Aarefa Johari of Sahiyo. The floor is yours. And please let me know whether the things that I presented about the situation in India, whether that corresponds also with your own experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for providing us with this platform to share our thoughts and our information. Yes, actually, what you presented, I wanted to kind of talk a bit about that. The COVID-19 lockdown in India has been extremely strict for the past 2 months. It's been definitely imposed very harshly it hasn't quite, I mean, our COVID rates have been increasing at an alarming extent. And the lockdown has ended up affecting the poorest of the poor and the domestic migrant workers who come from rural areas to urban areas in a terrible manner. But from the perspective of FGC, in India, FGC is practiced by a very small minority within the Muslim minority. It's practiced mainly by my community, which is the Bora community, and by some people in the southern Indian state of Kerala. Because of COVID-19, there's a general atmosphere of fear about, not just because the lockdown has been harshly imposed, but people are really afraid of stepping out for anything, even when the lockdown has eased a bit in these past few weeks in certain areas. So in most places, you will find that, of course, hospitals are largely catering to COVID patients, but even general practitioners are not really operating. Their clinics are not open yet. In the Bora community here in Mumbai, a lot of, we have been seeing a trend towards medicalization of the practice over the past few years, largely because of the movement against FGC. So while the movement has certainly helped to help a lot of people change their minds about the practice, it has also made the more the more conservative section of the community, the ones who very steadfastly want to practice FGC, they have become more conscious about doing it in a clinical setting because they don't want accidents to happen. Pardon me. Because of that shift towards medicalization, what we're seeing with COVID is that people aren't really able to access clinics, or even they go to nurses, sometimes homeopathy doctors, but with none of that available, we don't know for sure whether they are taking their daughters to get cut with untrained cutters in places where the transport is available. But we do know that those who are really determined to get their daughters cut will just postpone it by a few months or a year maybe. In the community, we don't have a very strict age limit. They say that girls should be cut after the age of 7 or at the age of 7, but then there's no upper time limit. So our fear is that right now it may be temporarily stalled, but it will continue once the lockdown is lifted and once life gets back to normal. Because of that, we feel it's really important to use this time to promote conversations on FGC in the community, and to be able to engage with the community in a manner that will help them see the perspective, see the harms and the disadvantages and the incorrectness of FGC. And I will come back to that in the context of the app that I'll talk to you about. I did want to raise one more small point. Uh, in Anne-Marie's presentation, there was a reference to the Supreme Court case in India. The, there is a petition in the court. It's been pending. It's been there for a couple of years, and it's still pending. It has been shifted to a larger bench, and the case will decide whether the courts believe that we need a law against FGMC or not, and based on that, if we get a ruling in our favor, then it would mean that the government might be compelled to frame a law. So definitely with COVID, there has, the Supreme Court is not really hearing anything besides the most urgent, important cases. And this particular case, which has been combined with a larger petition on, with the number of petitions all dealing with women's rights versus religious rights. And the FGC case has been bundled together with them. And we're not sure whether that itself is a good thing or not, and because we don't know how they're going to interpret all of this. But with COVID, we've realized that in these past couple of months, the current bench that we have, or the current bench of judges in the Supreme Court, they have come out with some rather disturbing judgments with respect to, getting rights for laborers, migrant workers. They seem to be, the Supreme Court has been a bit disappointing and disillusioning in the past couple of months. So we are not entirely sure whether we can really hope for a favorable judgment whenever our case is taken up, at least with this current state of the Supreme Court. And with that, I'd like to talk about how COVID has affected us as activists on the ground. Again, as Anne-Marie's presentation mentioned, definitely community outreach ground events have all had to be cancelled. We at Sahiyo, we focused more on community engagement and through education, conversation, storytelling. So we have had to cancel our activist retreat for training community members on how to effectively work at the grassroots level. We've had to cancel our flagship program called Thal Pe Charcha, which is discussions over food, because and we use that kind of platform to bring survivors and other community members together and help them share their experiences and feelings in a safe, intimate setting where we also bond over our traditional cuisine. So it's a nice sort of informal, safe environment where people can share, and it's been quite a success in the past 3 years. So we've had to cancel those events. Actually, this year we were planning to expand our program to more cities in India, but it will have to all be held online now, and so the outreach definitely will be a bit restricted. But what we are doing in terms of technology is developing an app called Mumkin. And we actually started this project with some funding last year, and it has taken quite a few months to come up with a very basic alpha version, which we have just launched with a small group of test users. And we were supposed to launch it just before the lockdown, but and then with COVID, the entire launch got delayed. But now here we've launched it this month, and there are some slides. So our app is called Mumkin. In Hindi and Urdu, the word Mumkin means possible. And so the aim of this app is to make difficult conversations about FGC possible among friends and family members. So we really believe that the main hindrance, we view FGC as a social norm, and we believe that in order to change a social norm, large scale polarized sort of debates that, where everybody is defensive and aggressive and not really listening to each other, that's not effective communication. So in order to change a social norm, we really believe that these conversations about FGC will have to happen in every home, amongst friends, amongst family members. And and these conversations have to be, one, well informed with respect to all aspects of FGC, whether it's what religion says about it, what medical science says about it, what the laws are about it, what is the human rights perspective. So anybody who, I mean, a lot of people want the practice to end but don't have all the right information to be able to share with somebody to convince them to end the practice. So one aim of the app is to provide that information, and the other aim is to help train users in effective communication styles. So obviously we have a long way to go and we will improve, but our app is the idea of the app is to ultimately use artificial intelligence to create these mock conversations where a user can have a mock conversation with a character built into the app. So it could be the character of a mother or a mother-in-law or a husband or a wife or a friend or distant relative. And so the community would be, the community members uh, can use this to have these mock conversations and get that training and preparing how to have real life conversations. So we're trying to make these conversations as real as possible, and we're currently receiving feedback from our test users. And we also, as you can see here, have the option of listening to survivor stories. So that's a feature we want to provide. We're audio recording stories that survivors have shared with us on our blog of their own experiences. And so say in real life, if you're having a conversation with your mother and you want to tell your mother that, please, listen to real survivors stories with me, you can use that from the app and expose them to what actual survivors who feel differently and who want FGC to end talk and what they say. And if you go to the next slide, so yeah, this is kind of just the beginning of the mock conversation. At this point, we have not been able to obviously build artificial intelligence for this yet. We are still developing the language and the semantics for it. So we've developed a chat bot. So in this case, we have a conversation between the user who's essentially a daughter, a circumcised young woman who's trying to have a conversation with her mother, who is pro FGC. And the mother is a chatbot, and as of now at this stage, the user gets to choose options in terms of what kind of response to say. So this is there's a small screenshot from the app that I've shared with you. And if you next slide, in the middle of the conversation, we've tried to come up with these sort of interactive, or not interactive, but these sort of encouraging screens where our app's mascot, which is this speech bubble octopus, where we'll encourage you to, continue the conversation and give you some, boost your feelings. So that will keep cropping up in the middle of the app, and the mascot will give you tips on how to have the conversation, what kind of tone to use and things like that. And next slide. Yeah, and so this is what at the end of the conversation, we also want to, at the moment we've created a level 1 conversation with the mother itself. We will be developing more conversations where it gets more in depth. Different levels will explore different aspects of FGC. So, one conversation would be just about the religious debate, another conversation could be about legal debate, etc. And next slide, we've also provided tips for a better conversation. So what terminology to use when you're discussing FGC with a person who is in favor of the practice. What kind of, how keeping calm is important, how listening to the other person is important. So we have a few tips on offer. And yeah, I don't know if there's a slide after this, or is this the last slide? Yeah. So this is basically a little bit of a snippet from our app, and we will be, as of now, it's just on Android. We will be in a few months coming out with a beta version that will hopefully also have an iOS version. We're not sure yet, but yeah, that if at that stage, if anybody, any of the participants here are interested in using the app, signing up as test users for the beta stage, I can drop my email address in the chat box, and you can email me and let me know if you'd like to be added to the list. Thanks. I'm done.
Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting. Thank you for sharing. Also very nice to see the screenshots to really have an idea of what the app is about. I could see in the chat box that we had quite some questions. We had two persons, Tarin and also Manas, having a question about why not using the term FGM. So I saw on the print screens of the app that you decide to use FGC in the app. Is that correct? And could you perhaps answer the question why you decided not to use the term FGM?
Sure, definitely. So yeah, in the app, we are largely using FGC as we do as an organization most of the time. We either use FGC or we just mirror the terms that survivors or community members use, which is often the term khatna in our language. The reason why there has been a global debate about whether or not to use FGM, and I think that has also led to a confusion among a lot of people, whether FGM and FGC are two different types of cuts. But no, FGM and FGC essentially refer to the same thing. But for a while now, people have, a lot of activists and community members have pointed out that the term FGM, where the word mutilation is used, feels rather judgmental. Feels like when community members are told that they practice FGM and they practice mutilation, they often feel offended and defensive and less inclined to listen to what somebody else may have to say, simply because the word mutilation has an inherent implication of some sort of malicious intention, and any parent who has had her daughter cut will tell you, whether, no matter how severe the cut is, any parent would say that their intention was not to harm their daughter, not to cause pain or any. They don't intend to mutilate their daughters, but according to them, what they're doing is practicing their community's ritual or culture. It's a social norm essentially, and social norms inherently mean that you have to do it because you have to do it, and that there would be consequences if you don't do it. So what activists have found is that when you avoid the word mutilation and say cutting instead, which is a more neutral term, and it's not judgmental, then community members will be far more open to listening to your perspective. So it's as simple as that. And of course, there are activists. I mean, of course, there are survivors who would prefer to use the word mutilation because they feel mutilated. In that case, when survivors share their stories with us, and if they choose to use the word mutilation, of course, we would retain that because that's for them to decide what they feel.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. We also have a question of Manas, I think to Mrs. Iburetti. Could you please explain what was the research focused on? So could you perhaps very briefly, shortly summarize what exactly the research was focused on? Maybe it was not 100% clear to all the participants. Could you be so kind to shortly summarize the main goal of the study that you presented to further clarify. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, actually, this is we try to, we actually have the policy brief, so you can also I will also send it to this group that and also we have the complete research with all of the what we call it is about 79 pages or something like that, that we can download it from our website. What the research actually done in here is besides try to identify the practices be done in the FGMC, we also try to look for the perception, what is the parents' reason to do the FGMC. And then we try also to compare with what is in the field looks like. I mean, who is done the FGM, who is done the, by whom the FGMC is done. And then mostly done by the traditional people like the shaman or kun, call it in Indonesia. In the last in 2018, almost very small people, midwiferys, to do this FGMC actually, because yeah, it seems that they don't like to do it because they know the health impact of the FGMC. But if they do, they will also do, they only do the what we call it, the symbolic of the FGMC instead of the true. And we'd like to use the cutting instead of mutilation, because in Indonesia we never had the mutilation. They just cut a part of the prepucium of the clitoris, for example, and that's why the term C is more likely to be used in Indonesia. And also we have the, since the most of the answer of the question about what is the reasons, and they said that this the religion reason instead of whatever. And we try to look for the law in the Al-Quran, for example. The Al-Quran never said anything about that, but in the Hadith there are some statement in there, not clearly, but there is also the circumcision in the women. That's why some people stick with that. The reason to do the FGMC is religion.
Yes.
Anyhow, this is the controversial things still happen until now. So that's why the research been done. We'd like to give all of the result to the government. Try to, as I told you, what is the policy about? The policy, it seems that it's encouraged to do the FGMC, which is not true. But it must be something happen in the policy makers. So this is actually the main result that we'd like to endorse to the government.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope that I can answer your question, and
Yes, thank you so much, Ibu Retty. And what you say, I do really recognize that. So from the research that I have done in various Asian countries, including, for example, in Thailand and Malaysia, you clearly see that religion plays a very, very important role in relation to the elimination of FGM as well. So this is one of the reasons why it is so hard to eliminate the practice in the region. It's a much more prominent factor, I think, compared to the African context. We also have a question from Samantha Roy. Really interesting to hear about the app. How do you plan on getting families who practice FGM to engage with this technology? Maybe Aarefa, you want to answer that question?
Yeah, so we've been working with the community for about 4 or 5 years. So we do have some networks within the community already. And as we have done in the past with our research survey on FGC, we would be adopting the snowball method where we spread information about the app to our existing networks and then ask all of them to spread it within their networks in the community. And that's how we're hoping to reach around at least 400 people at this stage during this grant period that we have for the next few months. And we'll definitely be doing, since it's a mobile application, we'll be doing a lot of campaigning in the community through social media and or through WhatsApp to bring attention to the launch of the app.
Thank you so much. That really clarifies. I also would like to give the floor to Corinne Whittaker. I saw that you post quite some very interesting questions, so it might be good if you are still there to give you the floor to ask those questions.
Hello.
So,
very pleased to meet you all. I am not using video because I usually work on the African continent, where if you
that's
use
fine.
video,
Don't worry.
you lose the audio.
Yes.
Or at least in northern Nigeria, that's the case. I find this a very fascinating discussion, some very innovative approaches, and some really comprehensive work on Indonesia. And I'm struck too by some of the introduction in the beginning regarding some of the differences with respect to COVID. And I think that this is such an evolving situation that there's some big questions regarding the awareness, the testing, whether it's an urban or rural phenomenon, and therefore how people respond. I was interested in some of the cross-learning from other areas, particularly, for example, in Indonesia, learning from the Egyptian situation where it's really also highly medicalized. And I think there have been some comments, including from Ebony, from Orchid, regarding the impact of efforts to try and monitor FGM when it's basically put under the carpet, which happens in many different ways, including no celebrations, but also the age of cutting. And that it struck me that in India, if a situation results in a delay, and that means older age at cutting, one of the reasons why FGM is hidden in an African context by making it by cutting at a younger age has to do with the fact that girls are not in school, therefore schools can't monitor, and girls are less likely to resist. They're less aware, and wondering therefore whether one of the really sad, perhaps positive outcomes of this might be, as you are with the app, starting work with girls to facilitate awareness and resistance when we deal with what happens after the COVID situation. I know I've asked a lot of questions, so I don't want to go over all of them, but I wanted to thank the presenters for really excellent input, as well as the commentators. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Corinne. Any of the two presenters want to react to the remarks? Or maybe I saw on the list of participants that we have some people from Egypt. I don't know if they are still with us or not, because indeed the medicalization in Egypt is an interesting angle to look at the problems due to COVID-19 in Asia as well. Is there anybody from Egypt? If not, maybe Aarefa, do you want to react perhaps briefly to the remarks of Corinne?
Specifically about older age cutting, I don't think it. I mean, it won't be. I doubt if, at least in the communities here, it's going to be postponed to that extent. I think those who really want to cut will wait a few months, a year at the most, and the child will still be like 8, and go ahead and have them cut. So I really don't think it would make that much of a difference. But of course, we have to make use of all the time that we have right now to spread awareness as much as possible.
Thank you. And I think the app is a really valuable opportunity to expand the conversation such that really anticipating efforts to end the practice, both short-term and long-term. I think the situation with COVID and Ebola are very instructive in terms of how we might monitor and anticipate various strategies, both short-term and long-term. It's really exciting work in India. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually have a last question to both of you, because when I look at Ebola, and that was also my first webinar, I ended actually on a quite positive note that I saw a window of opportunity. Later on, we saw all the devastating news of all the girls that are cut due to COVID-19, and that parents, especially in the African context, do see an opportunity for girls, an opportunity to get their curls cut. In the Asian context, do you see now, since we might agree that although the evidence is very anecdotal and we just start collecting, there's no proper research that is published in academic journals whatsoever, but that there is a trend towards a decrease of FGM at this point in Asia, do you then see this as an opportunity? And do you think that civil society organizations could take this as a momentum to really try to accelerate existing efforts to end FGM? Like the same, I think in times of Ebola, activists were actually overwhelmed by the fact that that FGM came to a halt due to Ebola. So people were really surprised and really like, oh, is it really possible that girls get married without undergoing the cut? And that was due to Ebola. And that's why learning from that experience during Ebola in West Africa, do you perhaps have any recommendations, or do you see a window of opportunity? Or what do you think, since you are from the countries and have a lot of expertise and knowledge on FGM, what do you think we should do at this moment in order to take this as an opportunity? Could you perhaps reflect on that?
Would you like to go first, Ibrati?
For me, it doesn't matter.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, of course, in India, we didn't really have the Ebola as a major concern. So we don't really have that frame of reference. And this is the first, the pandemic of this scale is the first time for India in a long time. And absolutely, it is a window of opportunity to, right now when everybody is really being pushed into the digital world and is having a lot of conversations with friends and family online. I think it's definitely an opportunity to, bring in these topics as well. People are concerned about health. People are talking about preserving their health, and this is people are talking about the impact of the lockdown on mental health. So it's definitely an opportunity to then also talk about the general well-being of girls and FGC as an aspect of health, and how it really can negatively affect the girl child and women.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you so much. Ms. Ibu Retty, do you want to share your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, just for this situation that now the young generation notice that the religion reason is not always right. So there is some people that asking, or the parent ask to the girls whether they'd like to have the sunat perempuan or the FGMC, and if they said no, they can ask for not having that FGMC. This is very interesting. So we this is the opportunity, of course, for the young generation to learn more about the religion itself, and also their right to show that this is not what we want. So we'd like to extend this opportunity to the young generation to stop the FGMC. So that's my thought to be this can be done in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Are there any pressing questions? And if so, I would like to ask you to raise your hand because I'm taking a lot of your time. I can talk about this for hours and hours, and I think all of us are very passionate about ending FGM, but we also have other things to do today. So I don't see any hands. I see some message in the chat box. No, those are answers. It's an incredibly interesting debate. Oh, sorry.
Could I just say something as well, Anne-Marie, just before?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that it's just been great to hear from both of our speakers, but also the questions. And I think this is kind of highlighting that, yes, there is a potential opportunity for us to think about how we can enable these conversations that, Aarefa has spoken about through the app at community level, so that we can really tackle the underlying gender norms and social norms, and in some cases religious imperatives that people perceive are associated with FGMC. But also understand that we will have more crises like this, in which times which we can't go out into communities and we can't do the work on the ground. So the app is a great example of how we can, make ourselves as a movement to end FGMC able to adapt and respond. So I think it would be great for us to think about how we can interconnect and also mainstream all of these great responses into all of the crisis response interventions that are happening, because we're seeing at the moment that FGMC is not really being prioritized enough. So how can we come together and make sure that it is?
Yeah, thank you for that valuable contribution, Ebony. I fully agree with you. And I actually would like to end this webinar with a personal note, because very often when we talk about FGM, in the Asian region, many people say, well, it's a type 4, it's a type 1, it's not as severe as infibulation, type 3. We all know this discussion. And I would like to share with you that I was invited to visit the clinic of Dr. Pierre Faudès in France. So he is the surgeon who performs reconstructive surgery after FGM. And to my surprise, he told me that he also operated about 10 or 12 women from Asia. So that included women from India and from Indonesia. And then I was asking Dr. Pierre Valdez, I asked him like, but how come you operated these women since, you know, they haven't been infibulated, their clitoris is not per se cut off, since we know that there is a lighter form of FGM in these regions. And then he explained to me that the damage done, for example, when you have a needle, the needle sometimes goes very deep, and all the damage done to the nerves in the clitoris is so devastating that he said, for me, for those women, if I need to classify that, it's a type 2 FGM. And I think this is something that we need to take into account. So there is empirical evidence in the clinic of Dr. Pierre Valdez that shows that also the type of FGM done to women and girls in Asia is harmful. And I think we need to take that into account when we have the debate, because very often when we talk about FGM in Asia, there are even discussions about removing type 4 from the definition of FGM, you know, and I think it's really important to get things right. And that is why I'm an academic and a researcher, but also why we need to have evidence-based discussions and information in order to guide our discussions. So this is something I just wanted to share with you, because I think it's important to have this knowledge and to know what we're talking about when we talk about Katna, when we talk about FGM or FGC or female circumcision in the region, Asia, because it's important to keep things right. So I would like to thank all of you for participating in this webinar. I want to thank Orchid Project, ARROW. I want to thank Sahiyo. I want to thank Miss Ibu Retty and all others who participated, who made this webinar a success. I think it's important to have these type of discussions. And last but not least, I want to thank my research assistant, Franz Joseph Biermans, who also helped me preparing this, the webinar today. Next webinar will be most probably about the impact of COVID-19 on the efforts to end FGM of the youth. So we will invite youth ambassadors, we will invite youth activists, and they will share with us how COVID-19 is impacting their work, because we shouldn't leave anyone behind. And I think the younger generation is the future. They do very important work as well. So I want to give them a platform. I want to give them a voice as well. So we will organize this webinar in about 2 weeks from now. I hope you will join us again. We will share all PowerPoint presentations. We will share the research of Mrs. Ibu Retty, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks from now. Thank you very, very much. In case you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I will be more than happy to help you. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.